The wind whispered low across the moor, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and wild heather. Eleanor Marsh stood by the narrow window of the cottage she had only moved into 2 days prior. The glass panes rattled in their frames as the wind swirled outside, pressing its icy breath against the old stone walls. Beyond the hedgerows, in the distance, Ravensmoor estate loomed beneath a sky veiled in thick grey. Though she had seen grand homes before, there was something peculiar about this one. Its eastern wing appeared half forgotten, shuttered windows and crumbling arches hidden beneath climbing ivy. The villagers rarely spoke of it unless prompted, and even then, only in hushed tones. Eleanor had not come here for ghost stories. She had come to escape. The accident that took James had left her breathless, untethered. London became unbearable, a cacophony of memories. So, when an old colleague from university mentioned a temporary teaching post in a remote Yorkshire village, Eleanor accepted without hesitation. Solitude, she thought, would bring clarity. She had not expected the silence to be quite so loud. On the third night, as twilight thickened into true dark, she sat by the fireplace, a book untouched on her lap. A low sound tugged her from her thoughts. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, echoed from the trees just beyond her cottage garden. She rose, heart nudging her ribs. Stepping onto the porch, she peered out across the tangled underbrush, where moonlight pooled between gnarled trunks. Nothing stirred. No fox, no wind-fallen branch. But the sound had been real. She knew it. The next morning, she mentioned it casually to Martha Bellamy, her nearest neighbor and a lifelong resident of Ravensmoor village. 3 knocks, you say? Martha's spoon paused mid-air over the tea she was stirring. Was it near the rowan trees? Eleanor nodded. Just past the gate. A tightness gathered in the old woman's expression. You must never answer a knock from the woods, dear. Not unless you know who calls. Eleanor chuckled lightly, unsure whether Martha was serious or merely steeped in the village's folklore. But something in the woman's eyes unsettled her, an old grief perhaps, or fear worn into habit. Later that evening, Eleanor opened the book again, determined to distract herself with routine. Yet her eyes returned over and over to the shadow-draped estate in the distance. The estate had no lights. No smoke rising from its chimneys. And yet, she had seen someone that morning, on the upper balcony, a tall figure with a pale shirt and a stillness that lingered too long. Lord Henry Blackthorne. She had heard his name spoken only once, in the village post office, when an elderly man referred to him as that boy who should have left with his mother. The wind moaned again, tugging at the trees. A soft knock came once more. 3 times. Eleanor stood frozen. This time, it was not from the woods. It was at her door. The knock was firm. Not rushed. Just 3 simple raps, as though whoever stood beyond the door already knew she would hesitate. Eleanor approached slowly, the weight of the silence pressing around her. She grasped the handle, then paused. Through the narrow glass panel, she could see no shape, no lantern. Nothing at all. Her breath caught. Who's there? She called, voice steadier than she felt. No answer. Another knock. This time, softer. As if it came not from the door, but from the air just outside. She opened it a crack. The porch was empty. Cold wind swept inside, carrying a flurry of dead leaves across her boots. Her eyes scanned the dark garden. Trees stood motionless. Not even a hair stirred. She shut the door quickly and turned the latch. Something was not right. The next day, she walked to the village shop to clear her head. Mrs. Elkins behind the counter greeted her with her usual cheer, but there was a subtle flicker in the woman's expression when Eleanor mentioned the strange knock. You should speak to Martha again. If anyone knows the old goings-on of this place, it's her, Mrs. Elkins said, lowering her voice. Eleanor did just that. As she crossed into Martha's garden, she noticed a cluster of red threads tied to the rowan tree near the fence. Each fluttered like a warning. "That tree keeps watch," Martha said as Eleanor's gaze lingered. "You're too close to the estate. Things shift when someone new moves near. I saw someone on the balcony yesterday. I think it was Lord Henry." Martha gave a knowing nod. He's still there. Keeps to the east wing mostly. Been that way since the funeral." "His mother's?" Martha's lips pressed thin. "That house hasn't held peace in decades. Not since the fire." Eleanor's curiosity stirred. "What fire?" But Martha simply turned back toward her kitchen. "Don't go wandering near the moor at night, Eleanor. And if you must look upon Ravensmoor, don't do it too long. It's a place that looks back." That evening, Eleanor couldn't resist. She walked out past the fence, past the tree with the red threads, and into the open moor. The heather rustled in the dying light. Mist curled like breath over the land. She knew it was foolish, but something called to her, familiar and strange all at once. Then she saw him. A lone figure stood near the ruins of a stone wall. He was facing away, his coat long and dark, unmoving in the wind. There was something strikingly still about him, like he did not belong in the living world. "Lord Henry," she called. The figure turned slowly. His face pale, unreadable. Eyes locked onto hers. He did not answer. Instead, he raised one hand and pointed, not at her, but beyond, toward the woods. Eleanor turned to look. There was nothing there. Just trees and growing dark. When she turned back, the man was gone. The next morning arrived swathed in mist, blurring the horizon and dulling the moor to shades of ash and silver. Eleanor could not shake the memory of the man's face, or his silence. Her dreams had been fragmented, filled with whispering voices and the sound of pages turning in the dark. She decided to visit the estate. Ravensmoor stood silent, as though it had exhaled its last breath a century ago. Its iron gates groaned when she pushed them open. Vines clung to the stone walls like old wounds refusing to heal. The gravel path wound through overgrown gardens, where statues of angels stood with blind eyes and moss-covered wings. She rang the bell at the main door. For a long time, nothing happened. Just as she turned to leave, it opened. Lord Henry Blackthorne stood before her, unchanged from the night before, tall, dark-haired, composed. Yet up close, his face was thinner than she expected, his eyes distant, like someone caught between worlds. "You should not be here," he said, voice quiet. "I needed to see for myself," she replied. "I think something's wrong with this place." He studied her, as though debating whether to close the door again. Then, with a reluctant breath, he stepped aside. "Do not stray," he warned. "There are rooms even I do not enter." The entrance hall smelled of old stone and lavender long faded. Paintings lined the walls, ancient portraits, their subjects half lost to dust. Eleanor paused before one. A woman with striking silver hair and a look of deep melancholy. Her nameplate read Lady Rowena Blackthorne. Henry followed her gaze. "My mother. She looks frightened." She was. That was all he said before moving on. He led her through the main parlor, where cold light filtered through stained glass. Eleanor could hear something, an almost inaudible ticking, like a clock buried far beneath the floor. They stopped before a door at the end of the corridor. Henry hesitated. "This was Arthur's room." "My brother. I thought you were the only child." "You thought wrong." He turned the handle and let the door creak open. The air inside was bitter with dust and stillness. Toys lay untouched on a small shelf. A rocking horse faced the window, its wooden frame aged and splintered. On the far wall hung a child's drawing, a house with 4 figures, the smallest of which had been crossed out in thick black ink. "He vanished when he was 10, Henry said. No one knows what happened. One morning, he was simply gone. They searched the moor for days. My mother said she heard him calling, even years after. Eleanor stepped inside. Her hand grazed the edge of a faded quilt. Something tugged at her memory, like she had seen this room before, though it was impossible. Then her foot caught the edge of a loose floorboard. She crouched, fingers prying it free. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small sketchbook. Its cover bore a symbol she did not recognize, an eye within a spiral. She opened it. The pages were filled with drawings of the estate, but the angles were wrong. Rooms where doors did not exist. Corridors that led to nowhere. One page showed a large door carved with leaves and thorns. Henry leaned over her shoulder. That door is real. But it's not in this house. Not anymore. What do you mean? He looked at her, a flicker of fear surfacing in his voice. It leads somewhere else. Somewhere we buried a long time ago. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. The sketchbook sat on her bedside table, its pages still open to the drawing of the door carved in thorns. The symbol on the cover, the spiral eye, seemed to pulse in her mind like a warning, or a memory she had not yet claimed. She dreamt again. This time, she stood in the woods behind her cottage, beneath the rowan trees. The air was thick with fog. Voices echoed between the trunks, too low to understand but too loud to ignore. And then, the knock came again, 3 deliberate raps, not from a tree, not from a door, but from deep beneath the ground. When she awoke, her hands were covered in soil. The next morning, she returned to Martha's cottage, the sketchbook tucked beneath her arm. She laid it out across the old woman's kitchen table. Martha's lips thinned as she flipped through the pages. I was afraid of this. You've seen it before. A long time ago. Before Henry was born. That symbol, she tapped the spiral, is older than this village. It's carved into the altar stones that lie beneath Ravensmoor. Before the estate was built, there was something else here. Something buried. Buried where? Martha looked away. Under the tree line. Near the standing stones. Eleanor did not wait. She walked straight into the forest, the map in the sketchbook guiding her like a compass. The further she went, the quieter the world became. No birdsong. No breeze. Just the crunch of leaves underfoot and the beat of her own heart. The standing stones rose from the earth like broken teeth. Old, weathered, and slick with moss. Beneath the largest, roots of the rowan tree twisted around a patch of ground where the earth was softer, as though it had been disturbed once, long ago. She knelt, fingers trembling, and began to dig. The soil gave way too easily. Within minutes, her hands struck iron. A ring. A handle. A door. It was smaller than she expected, no higher than her waist, buried flat beneath the roots. The spiral symbol had been etched into the center. She hesitated, then gripped the handle and pulled. The door groaned, the smell of damp stone rushing up to meet her. A narrow stairwell spiraled downwards, its walls carved from the earth itself. Torchlight flickered suddenly behind her. She turned to see Henry. I warned you, he said, voice low. You knew about this. I did. And I tried to forget. He stepped beside her, staring into the darkness below. My brother drew that door. Months before he vanished. Said he dreamt about it. Said there was something down there, calling to him. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Then why haven't you sealed it? Henry's face was pale. Because I think whatever's down there, is awake again. The stairwell swallowed their footsteps as Eleanor and Henry descended into the earth, the light of his torch casting long shadows that flickered against the damp stone walls. The air was thick with moisture and something older, an odor of decay and iron, like rusted blood. The spiral tunnel seemed to descend forever. Neither spoke. After a time, they reached a stone landing where the tunnel widened into a vaulted chamber. Carvings covered every inch of the walls, spirals, eyes, and unfamiliar symbols that pulsed under the torchlight like they remembered being touched. At the center of the room stood a dais. Upon it, a stone cradle, its surface weathered by time, vines creeping through cracks in the floor. Something was etched into the cradle's base, a name, barely legible. Arthur. Eleanor froze. This is... Henry's voice was hoarse. Yes. It's where they found his shoes. She stepped closer. As her fingers traced the carvings, the air seemed to thicken. A low hum vibrated through the chamber, just on the edge of hearing. It sounded like whispers. Thousands of them. She turned to Henry. Do you hear that? He nodded, grimly. They speak when you get too close. That's why I never returned. Suddenly, the torch dimmed. A gust of wind, not from the entrance, but from within the walls, snuffed the flame. Darkness fell. Henry. Eleanor grabbed his arm. I'm here. Another gust, colder now. The hum grew louder. Shapes moved in the corners, slithering not on the ground, but across the walls themselves. Something whispered Eleanor's name. Her knees buckled, and she dropped to the ground, clutching her head. She saw visions. A boy, Arthur, standing before the cradle, his hand touching the stone. His eyes white. His mouth open, speaking words not his own. She saw Lady Rowena, screaming, holding her child back, blood staining the floor. She saw a door closing. Sealing something in. Then another vision. Herself. Holding a child. Standing at the edge of the same dais. And behind her, a dark shape reaching out. Eleanor. Henry shook her. The visions shattered. She gasped, drenched in sweat. The chamber had fallen silent again, the whispers retreating like breath sucked into the earth. They stumbled out, up the spiral stairs, the torch relit by Henry's shaking hands. Neither spoke until they reached the surface. Night had fallen above. The rowan tree bent gently in the wind. Henry turned to her. You saw it too, didn't you? Eleanor's voice trembled. I think I saw the past. And the future. Henry's face darkened. That chamber feeds on what we bring. It shows us what it needs to. She looked down at her hands. Then it knows about the baby. His silence confirmed it. And then, from somewhere deep in the woods, came another sound. A child's laugh. Morning brought no relief. The light through Eleanor's window was grey, cold, and heavy. Though her body ached with exhaustion, her mind refused to rest. The vision of Arthur, the blood-soaked altar, the whispering voices, they lingered like smoke, clinging to the corners of her thoughts. She opened the sketchbook again. On a page she did not recall turning to, a new image had appeared. It showed her. Not a dream version, not imagined. It was her, unmistakably pregnant, standing in front of the stone cradle, her arms outstretched as if offering the child. She dropped the book. Later that day, she returned to the estate. Henry was waiting. There's more, she said without greeting. He gave a slow nod. There always is. They went back to the chamber, the torchlight dimmer than before. The whispers returned instantly, no longer subtle. The chamber pulsed with them, as if the very stone breathed. This time, Eleanor stepped to the dais without hesitation. She placed her hand on the cradle. The stone beneath her skin felt warm. The whispers quieted. Then, a single word echoed around them, clear, low, ancient. Return. Henry flinched. What does it mean? He shook his head. I do not know. But I fear the chamber has chosen. They turned to leave, but the path behind them had shifted. The walls no longer curved as before. The spiral stairwell was gone. In its place, a corridor stretched forward, darker than pitch. Eleanor hesitated. It wants us to go further. We should not follow it, Henry said, his voice brittle. But it knows about the child. I have to know why. She stepped into the darkness. The walls were tight, the air warmer. The torch flickered violently as they walked. Then the corridor opened into another chamber, this one circular, smaller, the walls covered in a mural. It told a story, painted in reds and ochres. Eleanor moved closer. She saw a family, mother, father, 2 sons. The younger boy bore the spiral on his chest. In the next image, he was standing alone before a tree marked with red thread. Then a door. Then darkness swallowing him whole. The final image showed a woman holding a child, kneeling before the same cradle in the underground room. But the child's face was gone. Scratched out. Blood had been smeared across the stone, long dried but unmistakably real. Eleanor turned to Henry. This has happened before. He exhaled sharply. It's a ritual. A sacrifice. No, she whispered. It's an exchange. At that moment, the ground beneath them trembled. The torch dimmed again. A presence filled the air, thick and heavy, pressing down on their lungs. From the far side of the chamber came the sound of footsteps. Small. Barefoot. Approaching. Henry stepped in front of her. Arthur. He called. The footsteps stopped. Then, a voice, young, echoing, but not quite human, spoke from the dark. He's not yours anymore. The voice hung in the air long after the footsteps faded. Eleanor clutched Henry's arm. Her blood ran cold. The shadows along the edge of the chamber writhed, almost as if watching. Did you hear that? She whispered. Henry gave a slow nod. It was him. But not him. They left the chamber in silence, the torch barely holding its flame. When they emerged into the manor's cellars once more, the air felt fresher, but not safer. Eleanor paced the parlor that evening, her thoughts turning like storm clouds. This child, our child, is part of something that began long before I arrived. Henry looked hollow. My mother used to say the blackthorns were guardians of blood. I always assumed it was figurative. Something poetic. But I think it was literal. She stopped. Your mother, did she know? She suspected. And she feared it. Which is why she tried to burn the cradle. And why she died shortly after. Eleanor's eyes widened. The fire. Henry nodded. The flames didn't start in the nursery. They started in the chapel beneath it. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Eleanor turned to the fire. There's one person who might know the truth. Martha Bellamy's cottage sat nestled beneath twisted yews. She was not surprised when Eleanor arrived unannounced. I knew you'd come eventually, Martha said, setting tea by the fire. You know what's happening, Eleanor said plainly. Martha gave a weary nod. The Ashgrove Pact. That's what it was called. Eleanor leaned forward. What was the pact? Centuries ago, Nathaniel Blackthorne made a deal. He was obsessed with lineage. Power. Legacy. But the land was dying. His sons were dying. So he turned to the old ways. Witchcraft. Older than that. Bloodbinding. A spirit, one bound to the Blackthorne line, offered him protection. Strength. But in return, every few generations, it demanded something. Eleanor's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. A child. Martha nodded. Not just any child. One marked. Born under the crescent moon, at the hour the veil is thinnest. Eleanor whispered, Samhain. Precisely. She stood and pulled a leather-bound book from a shelf. This house used to be the caretaker's cottage for the estate. My grandmother kept the records. Look. She opened the book to a page dated 1811. A woman named Eliza Blackthorne died in childbirth. The margin was scribbled with symbols. Spirals. Crescents. Blood drops. Every 100 years, it happens again. They call it a gift. But it's a curse. Eleanor's hands trembled. What happens to the child? Martha didn't answer immediately. She simply turned the page. There was a drawing. It showed the cradle again. And inside it, a child, not alive, not dead. Suspended in between. Frozen in time. The storm began just after midnight. Thunder rolled through the moors like a warning from the heavens, and the wind howled as if echoing centuries of buried secrets. Inside the manor, Eleanor stood before the nursery door. Her breath caught. The cradle was back. It stood in the middle of the room, perfectly intact. Not burnt, not aged, just waiting. Henry entered behind her, his voice tight with fear. I had it destroyed. I know. The room was icy cold. Every window had been shut, yet the curtains billowed, stirred by an unseen force. On the floor, scattered petals of wolfsbane. It's begun, Eleanor whispered. She reached for Henry's hand, but his skin was hot, too hot. His eyes were glassy, as if something inside him was fighting to remain. Henry. He staggered back. There's something inside me. It's waking. From the hallway, a deep sound rose, a growl, not quite human. Martha and Dr. Crowley arrived moments later, breathless. The pact, Martha said. It's not just the child. It needs a vessel. A vessel? Eleanor demanded. Someone of the bloodline. Someone it can inhabit. It's not just the child it wants to be reborn. Henry collapsed. Crowley rushed to his side, checking his pulse. His body's fighting it. But not for long. The thunder cracked above them, and the walls trembled. From the cradle, a faint, ghostly cry filled the room, neither joyous nor sorrowful. A cry from beyond. Martha knelt beside Eleanor. You must choose. The child is a key, but Henry is the gate. Eleanor stared at her husband. His lips moved silently. His eyes locked on hers with a mixture of terror and pleading. What happens if the spirit takes him fully? Martha hesitated. He'll be lost. And not just to you. To the world. Eleanor's heart pounded. And if I stop it? Then the pact ends. But so does the line. She stood slowly, her breath steadying. No more blackthorns, she said. Martha placed something in her hand, a small dagger, etched with old runes. Only blood can end what blood began. Eleanor moved toward the cradle, the spirit's presence growing thicker, oppressive. Henry stirred, eyes flickering between his own and something older, darker. The ghostly child cried again, louder now, more insistent. Then, Eleanor spoke. Enough. She raised the dagger. But as she did, Henry's voice rang out, not the spirit's, but his own. Eleanor. Stop. The storm halted. The wind fell still. And the cradle moved. By itself. It turned to face her. Inside it, swaddled in shadows, lay the child. Its eyes were open. And they were hers.